CKGSB, China's only not-for-profit independent business school.
It's a very complex, enormous undertaking. I've stressed three major building blocks to the story. More job growth, especially in the services sector, and that's beginning to happen. Higher wages through urbanization, where urban workers on average earn about 3 times their counterparts in the countryside, and that's beginning to happen. And thirdly, addressing the shortcomings of the social safety net. You can boost labor income by job creation and urbanization, but people will not spend the money. They'll save it out of fear if there's no security for the future. And the recently concluded third plenum of the 18th Party Congress held last November does provide a number of potential reforms that will address these safety net issues. The one-child family planning policy, hukou reform, interest rate liberalization, also a proposed 30% tax on state-owned enterprise profits by the year 2020. These are all to fund the welfare system. These are all big positives in addressing the social safety net. So those are the three pieces. Now it's up to the Chinese leaders to implement, and I'm constructive on that, but the proof still remains to be seen. China is not giving up on manufacturing in any way whatsoever. In fact, it's really moving up the value chain, focusing much more on what the government refers to as strategic emerging industries. Industries such as electric cars, alternative energy, biotech, new age information technology, where there are plans to really significantly increase the growth rate in all of these industries between now and 2020. China historically is a very open economy. Its import share of GDP has averaged about 28% since 2002. Compare that with Japan, Asia's first growth miracle, where the import share historically was 1/3 that, about 9%. So if China maintains its import share, there's enormous opportunity for producers and trading partners around the world to participate in this shift to internal demand. The services share of China is tiny. It's now up to 46%. It had been 43% in 2011. It's going to grow probably into the 55 to 60% range between now and 20 to 25. That increase will be around 12 trillion US dollars, just the increase in the scale of the Chinese services sector. And under some, I think, reasonable assumptions in describing the openness, the tradability of the Chinese services sector, that's a bonanza for the rest of the world. It could be anywhere between 4 and 6 trillion US dollars between now and 2025. And so a broad variety of services competitors, especially those in the United States, which is preeminent in services, will have an opportunity to participate in China. And that would mean anywhere from retail trade to domestic transportation to supply chain logistics, finance, and the big one, I think, for the future, the opportunity for foreign companies to get into big time in China is healthcare. I hesitate to use these words, hard landing, soft landing. Hard landing is a sort of a devastating house of cards falling down scenario. I've never been in that camp in China. Most people are always looking at China with the hard landing right around the corner. The growth rate has slowed, but the employment generation in China has actually accelerated. So what does that tell you? It tells you that when you pick apart the numbers and you see where the growth rate has slowed, it's slowed predominantly in the so-called secondary sector, which is manufacturing and construction. And you would expect that given the focus that manufacturing has on export-led economic growth. The rest of the world is still growing very slowly. Where the growth rate is picked up is in the services sector, the tertiary sector. And for the first time in modern China's history, the services sector is now the largest sector in the Chinese economy. At 46% in 2013, it actually exceeded that of manufacturing and construction combined at 44. So what you have is that China, the composition of GDP growth in China is shifting from capital-intensive manufacturing to labor-intensive services. GDP is slowing, employment is picking up. That's not a landing. That's a great transition from the old China to the new China. I think all of these fears are based on legitimate concerns, and there has been too much debt in China. There has been rapid growth in shadow banking. There has been excessive house price appreciation, making affordable shelter increasingly difficult for many Chinese people. But the question you asked is the right question. Are these concerns at risk of bringing the entire economy down? Are they preconditions of massive amount of systemic risk, the likes of which we saw in the crisis of 2008 and 2009? My answer is absolutely not. For every one of these problems, there are factors on the other side of the equation that should temper your concern. The property bubble is at the top of everyone's list. What's missing in an assessment of the excess house price appreciation is the fact that there's enormous organic demand for shelter in China, given the extraordinary pace of rural-urban migration. It's been running 15 to 20 million a year since the year 2000. We'll do another 100 million between now and 2020. Newly migrated residents of urban areas need shelter. They have demand for housing. Shadow banking. It's worrisome. It's in the shadow banking sector in China by IMF or Financial Stability Board estimates is growing rapidly, but it's growing off a low base. The Financial Stability Board estimates for 2012, the last data point that's available, the shadow banking sector in China is 26% of GDP. The global norm is over 110%. So it's growing rapidly off of a low base. And the debt situation at local governments is definitely worrisome. The government has conducted an audit indicating the extent of the problem. The People's Bank of China is definitely sending strong signals, that it is trying to implement much tighter conditions in overnight bank funding markets to slow down the pace of credit creation and to wean China off this dangerous strain of debt-intensive growth. The early take on this fifth-generation leadership is very impressive. They're off to a fast start. They're very determined. They're very focused, moving ahead quickly with pronouncements. But the honeymoon's over. So we've gone through the third plenum, and there's been a big movement in setting up a new implementation mechanism in China, the so-called Leading Commission on Deepening Reforms. There's been a lot of drama around what this new leadership has done and what it wants to do, and now it's got to get to work and do it. Right now, I give them outstanding marks. They're off to a very, very strong start, and I won't say that's easy at all to do, but the toughest work now lies ahead.